When you think of Roman emperors, you probably picture powerful rulers commanding vast legions and building magnificent monuments. But behind the marble statues and golden laurel crowns lay a world of shocking depravity, twisted obsessions, and deaths so brutal they would make modern horror films seem tame. These weren't just political leaders. They were men drunk on absolute power who transformed the empire into their personal playground of cruelty and excess. Tonight, we're diving deep into the darkest corners of Imperial Rome to uncover scandals so outrageous they were hidden from history books for centuries. We're talking about emperors who declared war on the ocean, married their horses, and turned murder into entertainment. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. These weren't isolated incidents of madness. This was systematic brutality carried out by the most powerful men in the ancient world, and their endings were often just as shocking as their crimes. I've spent months researching imperial archives, consulting ancient historians, and piecing together testimonies that Roman scholars tried to bury. What I discovered will change how you see the Roman Empire forever. These aren't just stories about bad rulers. These are accounts of human beings who wielded godlike power and used it to satisfy their most twisted desires. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the Roman Empire's greatest threat wasn't barbarian invasions or economic collapse. It was the monsters sitting on the throne. But before we begin, let me warn you. What you're about to hear contains descriptions of violence and depravity that even ancient Romans found shocking. These emperors didn't just abuse their power. They redefined what it meant to be human. Our first emperor ruled during what historians call the height of Roman decadence. Caligula ascended to power in 37 CE at just 24 years old, and within months the empire realized it had crowned a madman. But his insanity wasn't the random chaos of a disturbed mind. It was calculated, methodical, and designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on everyone around him. Caligula's first scandal involved his relationship with his three sisters. Roman law strictly forbade incestuous relationships, but the young emperor didn't just break these taboos. He flaunted them publicly. He forced the Roman Senate to declare his sister Drusilla a goddess while she was still alive, then openly conducted sexual relationships with all three sisters during state banquets. Senators were required to attend these events, watching in horrified silence as their emperor violated every sacred Roman tradition. When Drusilla died suddenly in 38 CE, Caligula's grief transformed into something far more sinister. He declared a period of mourning, during which laughing, bathing, or dining with family became capital offenses. Citizens who failed to show sufficient grief were executed on the spot, but the emperor's mourning rituals went beyond legal decree. He claimed Drusilla appeared to him nightly, demanding vengeance against those who had failed to appreciate her divine status. This delusion triggered Caligula's most infamous scandal. He began appearing in public dressed as various gods, demanding worship from Roman citizens. During one ceremony, he ordered the construction of a temporary bridge across the Bay of Naples, stretching over 3 miles. For 2 consecutive days, he rode back and forth across this bridge wearing the armor of Alexander the Great, proclaiming himself superior to Neptune himself. The cost of this spectacle bankrupted the imperial treasury and required new taxes that crushed the Roman middle class. But Caligula's divine delusions were only the beginning. His sexual appetites became legendary for their cruelty and humiliation. He established a brothel inside the imperial palace, forcing the wives and daughters of senators to work as prostitutes. These weren't volunteers seeking imperial favor. They were respectable Roman matrons dragged from their homes and compelled to service anyone willing to pay the emperor's fees. The money earned went directly into Caligula's personal accounts, while their husbands and fathers were forced to watch their family honor destroyed. The emperor's sadism extended to his treatment of political prisoners. Traditional Roman execution was swift, designed to minimize suffering while maintaining dignity. Caligula transformed execution into theatrical entertainment. Prisoners were forced to fight wild animals while wearing costumes that mocked their former status. Former generals dressed as gladiators faced lions. Respected philosophers were made to debate while chained to posts with hungry bears circling around them. His most disturbing innovation was the slow execution. Caligula discovered that traditional methods killed too quickly to provide adequate entertainment. He developed techniques to prolong death for hours, ensuring maximum suffering while keeping victims conscious. Guards received detailed instructions on which wounds would incapacitate without immediately killing. Prisoners experienced systematic torture designed to destroy their sanity before their bodies finally gave out. The emperor's cruelty wasn't limited to criminals or political enemies. He turned violence against his own supporters when the mood struck him. During one dinner party, Caligula suddenly ordered his guards to arrest a senator who had complimented the wine selection. The man was tortured to death in the palace courtyard while other guests continued eating, knowing that any protest would result in their own execution. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Caligula's reign was how he turned cruelty into policy. He didn't simply commit random acts of violence. He systematically used fear to reshape Roman society according to his twisted vision. Every Roman law became subject to his whims, creating a legal system where survival depended entirely on the emperor's momentary pleasure. Citizens who had lived their entire lives as law-abiding Romans suddenly found themselves criminals for offenses that didn't exist the previous day. Caligula would wake up and decide that wearing purple was treason, or that failing to applaud loudly enough during his speeches warranted immediate execution. The emperor's paranoia reached its peak when he began seeing conspiracies everywhere. His personal guard received orders to monitor conversations throughout the city, reporting back any comment that could be interpreted as criticism. Citizens learned to speak in whispers, avoiding eye contact with strangers who might be imperial spies. The vibrant public discourse that had defined Roman culture for centuries vanished as people retreated into terrified silence. Caligula's most grotesque spectacle involved his beloved horse, Incitatus. The emperor didn't simply pamper this animal with luxury. He appointed the horse as a consul, giving it equal rank with Rome's highest elected officials. Senators were required to bow before the horse and seek its counsel on matters of state. The imperial palace constructed a marble stable with purple blankets and a collar made of precious stones. Incitatus dined on golden oats, while Roman citizens faced starvation due to the emperor's wasteful spending. But this wasn't just eccentric behavior. It was deliberate humiliation designed to demonstrate that Roman traditions meant nothing. By elevating a horse above the Senate, Caligula forced the empire's most respected men to acknowledge their worthlessness in his eyes. Former generals and accomplished statesmen found themselves prostrating before an animal, their dignity shattered beyond repair. The emperor's final months brought escalating violence, as his mental state deteriorated further. He began randomly executing people for entertainment, sometimes killing entire families to observe different reactions to grief. Palace servants lived in constant terror, knowing that serving the wrong wine or arriving moments late could result in immediate death. Caligula would order executions during meals, forcing guests to continue eating while blood pooled on the marble floors around them. His end came on January 24th, 41 CE, when his own Praetorian Guard finally acted. The conspiracy involved Cassius Chaerea, a guard commander whom Caligula had repeatedly humiliated with sexual taunts and degrading assignments. During a theatrical performance in the palace, Chaerea approached the emperor as if delivering a routine message. Instead, he drove his sword deep into Caligula's chest. Other conspirators immediately joined the attack, stabbing the emperor over 30 times as he collapsed in the narrow corridor beneath the palace. But the violence didn't end with Caligula's death. The conspirators hunted down his wife and infant daughter, determined to eliminate his entire bloodline. They found Caesonia in the Imperial apartments and killed her with a single sword thrust to the heart. The baby Drusilla was murdered by having her head smashed against a stone wall, her tiny body left broken on the palace floor. The conspirators believed that any member of Caligula's family carried the same madness in their blood, yet even in death, Caligula's legacy of terror continued to shape Roman politics. Future emperors learned that absolute power required absolute ruthlessness to maintain. The precedent had been set. Imperial rule was no longer about governing an empire. It was about controlling through fear, degradation, and systematic cruelty. The next emperor to master these dark arts would make Caligula's reign seem almost merciful by comparison. Nero Claudius Caesar took power in 54 CE at just 16 years old, but his youth didn't prevent him from orchestrating some of the most elaborate and sadistic crimes in human history. Where Caligula had been impulsive and chaotic, Nero was calculating and theatrical. He understood that true power came from making people complicit in their own destruction. Nero's first major scandal involved the systematic elimination of his own family members, starting with those closest to him. But he didn't simply order their executions. He crafted elaborate schemes designed to maximize psychological torture before their deaths. Their deaths. These emperors didn't just rule an empire, they transformed it into a laboratory for human cruelty, pushing the boundaries of what civilized society could endure. From Caligula's divine delusions to Nero's theatrical sadism, we've witnessed how absolute power corrupts absolutely, creating monsters who viewed human life as nothing more than entertainment. But here's what's truly terrifying. These weren't ancient anomalies or historical curiosities. They were systematic demonstrations of what happens when unchecked authority meets twisted ambition. Every torture method they perfected, every psychological manipulation they employed, every degradation they inflicted became a blueprint for future tyrants throughout history. The Roman Empire survived these monsters, but it never recovered from the scars they left. The very foundations of Roman civilization, built on law, honor, and civic duty, crumbled under the weight of imperial madness. Citizens learned to live in fear, senators became complicit in their own humiliation, and an entire culture was reshaped by terror. Perhaps the most chilling lesson from these imperial scandals isn't about ancient Rome at all. It's about the human capacity for evil when power removes all consequences. These emperors started as ordinary men, but unlimited authority revealed the monsters lurking beneath their civilized facades. The next time you hear about absolute power, remember these names. Remember what they did with theirs. And remember that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance against those who would use authority to satisfy their darkest impulses.